Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Tammy Ernest and I am a Longarm quilter. And here on my channel I like to share customer finishes as well as my own personal projects. Today we are in my sewing room and I'm going to show you how I load a quilt onto the Longarm. And depending on how long the video goes, I'll go ahead and show you how I stitch it out and just the whole process. I'll try to explain everything. I've had lots of questions in the comments about how do you scale pantographs, how do you, just all the things, you know, bobbin threads and color of thread and pantographs. So we'll just try to talk about as much of that as we can. If there's any other questions that I don't answer, just leave a comment and we'll either do it on another video or I'll try to answer your question there. So I have this quilt right here, and this is a rather large quilt, and we're going to measure it first and measure the backing fabric, and then I'll explain how I decide which way to load the quilt. So I have a, let's see, what is this, 120 inch tape measure, and I just first of all measure side to side. So one side of this quilt is 91 inches wide, and I've written that down, and then I'll turn it the other way. That's the backing fabric draped over the back there. And we'll measure going the other direction. So this quilt does not have necessarily a top and a bottom. Pretty much the design is the same no matter which direction you load it or look at it. So that direction, it's 88. So the quilt is 88 wide, 91 long. Now let's look at the backing fabric. This backing fabric is pieced, so that will help decide which direction I load it on the Longarm. So let me measure it first, and then we'll talk about the piecing part. So if you send your quilt to me, I ask that you, the backing fabric and the batting, if you send your own batting, should be 4 inches larger on every side. So because that top measured 88 by 91, if we added 4 inches to each side, what would that be? 92, 96 by 99. So I need this backing to be at least that big. You can leave it bigger if you're sending a wide backing. As long as it's wide enough this way, you don't have to cut the length of it so that it matches your quilt. I will return all of that to you. It's actually easier to load it on the Longarm with the selvages still on there. So my backing fabric on this one is almost 99 inches, just right at 98.5 that direction. And let's measure the other way. So that 4 inches on either side is, it needs to be at least that, but it can be more than that. That's not a problem. So I'm not going to open this whole thing. It's folded over in half. And I am at 49 inches, so double that would be 98. So my backing fabric that has been sent is a 98 by 99, so almost square. So let me show you. This is pieced. So I have a seam right here running this way. So let me flip this back the other way because this seam is running this direction. So I have a selvage on this top part here. I have another stitched seam right here, and that's actually a different fabric than the whole rest of it. And I have one seam right here, and these seams are running this direction. So my preference would be to load this backing with the seams parallel to the bars. And the reason for that is if I would turn this backing fabric this direction, with a seam running perpendicular to my bars, then this seam is going to build on itself. Each time I roll it around those bars, that seam is going to stack up higher and higher and higher. And it's larger, you know, because it's 2 layers of fabric, at least 2, 3 if it's, this one's pressed in one direction. So I actually have 3 layers of fabric right there. So where that is going around those bars and being wrapped around the bars, it is continuing to get larger and larger. And it can be done, but if I have a preference, I would rather load it with it parallel to the bars, because that means that that seam will go across that bar one time, and then it's regular fabric all the way around. So let me show you what I mean. All right, and looking at this backing fabric, what she has done is she has added an extra piece of material right here that is different from the rest of the backing fabric. And the reason she's done that is to make it large enough. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drape this over the long arm this way. My seams are running parallel to the bars. You can see a seam right here. Put the skinny part of the quilt, the 88 inches, on the sides, and I'm going to have the quilt long ways this way. So my 88 is going to be on that side, and it was 91, so I'm going to put the 91 this direction and the 88 that direction, if that makes sense. All right, so let me show you how I load this on to the long arm. So my back bar here has the leader on it. I do use red snappers. And let me see if I can show you. So inside of this casing is a red tube. So when I got my leaders, I actually stitched a casing in there. Your leaders will not come with that casing. I stitched it over, and I stitched it in a bright color thread, and that was a suggestion I saw on someone else's video. That way I can line up my selvage edges or the edging of my backing fabric with that bright line, instead of being a white line that blends in with the leader. So with a bright line I can see it, I know that it's straight, and I can load my fabric right along that line. So I stitched that casing into there. So inside of that casing is this red tubing. Let me see if I go the other direction. And there's one tubing in the back one, and there's one tubing on this front one. Let me pull this out a little bit. I'll just pull it from the other direction since it's closer to the camera and you can see. So this is just a red tubing, probably 1/4 inch diameter, maybe 3/8 inch diameter. And this runs through that casing that I have put into the leader. And then I'm going to use these red snappers. This is just one of the small ones that I'm going to use just to line up the fabric. But what these do is these will then snap over that with the fabric in there, and it keeps it tight. Just a lot quicker way than rather pinning the entire backing fabric. So let me scoot this back in. All right, and you'll notice that my leader is tucked behind this other bar, this bar here. And I need to make sure when I'm loading it that that leader is behind that bar so that it keeps the quilt, and then the quilt will lay flat underneath that, just like that. So what I'm going to do, I have loaded it from the back side before. Because I'm in a tight spot, that means I actually have to crawl under the long arm to get to the back side. So if I don't have to, I don't do that. Instead, I will find approximately the center of my backing, and I'm going to use these the smallest binder clips, just to get it secured to the to the back bar, and then I'll put larger ones on there. So I'm just picking a spot that's about in the middle. I'm lining up that, so if you can see the red line right there, and I'm lining up my backing fabric just right along that red line, and I snap the small red snapper right onto there to hold that fabric onto there. I'm going to go down to this end. Keep it taut, and I'm just doing the same thing all the way to this end, and one more all the way at this end. Okay, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the large ones. I have 3 different sizes, so you saw the smallest ones, and these are the next, these are the largest ones, and then let me grab some medium ones. And these are the medium size. All right, so because this is a large quilt, I'm going to start with the largest ones, and then if I need to add in some medium size ones, I will, to get that entire backing onto the leader. So now that I have my material, you know, somewhat, it's like those smaller ones are just holding it onto the leader for me so that I can get these larger ones onto here. So I'm making sure that fabric is lined up along that edge. And I'm going to start down at this end. These just snap onto there. And I'm going to start so that this part is a little bit overlapped the end of the fabric. And I'm going to remove that smaller one. That's just there to hold my spot. Just to be an extra set of hands until I get that on there. So I've removed the smaller one, and I'm just going to continue to snap that fabric into place. All right, and the first one's all in place. I'll grab a second long one, and I'm just going to start this one at the end of the last one and remove that little, the little one that's there holding my spot. And just continue to line my fabric up along that red line. And press that onto there. So I have the red snapper snapped along. You can see my red line there. And my fabric just barely poking out from underneath there. I have only this small section left to do, so I'm going to use the small, not the smallest ones, but the medium size to go from here out past that fabric. That edge is all secured from one end all the way to the other. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll that backing fabric up onto that back bar. So you'll see it rolling. I have to go down to the end of the machine to actually crank this and to roll it. Going to pull my fabric taut. I want it to roll up nice and even onto that back bar. As I'm rolling, I'm continuing to just to work that fabric, make sure there's no wrinkles, no puckers. Trying to keep it as straight down the edges as I can. Sometimes the fabric isn't always square. Continuing to work those wrinkles out. You can see that one seam, how it's all along that edge right there, and so it's all going to hit the bar at the same time and all be rolled in at once and not building on itself if I would have turned it the other direction. Okay, so I've made it to the other end, making sure this is all smoothed out. All right, so I have the other end ready to load onto the bottom bar. So same thing here. Now let me fold this back. I have 2 bars here, and let me tip you down just a little bit. All right, I have 2 bars here. This first one is what the backing fabric attaches to, so that it's completely from one side to the other. It also has the red snapper encased in that casing, and that's what I'm going to do first. The second bar that's here is for the quilt top, and we'll put that on in just a second. So let me drape this back across. I'm just wanting my fabric to lay as evenly as possible. I'll let out a little bit of that just so it can go slack and I can attach it to this other one. So again, I take my smallest red snappers. I want the backing fabric to go underneath this innermost bar, because that is where my quilt top is going to go. I also have a red line on this casing, and I am lining up my fabric right to that red line. And I am putting a red snapper in that spot, bringing it down to the other end, lining up my fabric on that red line, placing a small red snapper there, and one more at the opposite end. All right, and now I'm going to add the larger ones. Because this is a large quilt, I'm going to add just a couple more in here just to make sure this stays right in line. I add another one halfway in between there, and another one right here on this side, just to hold my fabric in place. All right, so now I have the largest one. I'm going to start down here at this end. I'm going to make sure it overlaps the fabric at the very end. And when I get the large snapper close to that smallest one, I'm just going to slide that smallest one off and set that one away. I do use the smaller ones sometimes if I have just a tad bit more space that I need to cover and I don't want to use another medium-sized one. I can use a couple of the smallest ones to fill in that extra space, but I want every inch of that backing fabric attached to the leader. I'm just lining this one up right next to the last one. You can see that smallest red snapper is right there. I'm just going to remove that one because it's holding it, the larger one's holding it in place where I need it at this end, and I still have a small one holding it at that end. Line up the fabric and snap it in place. I have just enough space to do a small, or do one of the medium-sized ones. So I will do that one. Right here. Remove the smallest one out of my way. And it's all in place. Okay, I have enough red snappers to go the entire length of both bars. All right. So now what we're going to do is roll this. I want it all rolled up onto this bottom, this back bar. And again, at this point, I want to smooth out all wrinkles. Also, at this point, if this backing fabric was extremely wrinkly, as I was rolling it onto these bars, I could use some best press, and I could spray it onto here and then roll it into the quilt, and it would press those wrinkles out as it rolls up on the bar. This one is not excessively wrinkly, so I'm not going to worry about that. Now here's this one seam, one of the seams that's in this backing. You can see that seam coming around right there, and it's all going to roll onto that bar at the same time and not build up on itself. Unroll this enough that these red snappers come out from underneath that back bar, because I want to start this quilt as close to that as I can and try to get most of the quilt on this piece of backing and not that other that change that was added there. All right, and that's how you load your backing fabric on. So next we're going to take the quilt top. Like we mentioned before, I am going to do the longest part in this direction. That aids in two things. First of all, hopefully I can get the entire quilt top on that one piece of backing fabric and I don't have to go to that the change. The other thing that it helps is I can go longer without having to, I can do a longer pass without having to move the quilt. So I need to measure and see if make sure that I've got the longest side. This one should measure 91. Now the important thing about this, I can load it this direction because I know the pantograph that we're using. Yeah, that's the 91. I know the pantograph that we're using, and it's not a directional one, so it doesn't matter whether it stitches out this way or stitches out this way, it's going to look the same. There are some pantographs, if I'm wanting it to go a certain direction, I have to load it in that way. So it's always good to know which pantograph you're thinking about using prior to loading your quilt top. All right. So the quilt top is going on this front bar, the inner one of the top bar, of the front bars. Now I could I have a casing sewn into this as well, but I have chosen not to use the red snappers on this one. Instead, I pin the quilt top to this leader. I find it's a little more precise. It keeps that quilt exactly where I want it. The backing fabric, because it's larger than the quilt, I can have some leeway. You know, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but the quilt top, I want to make sure it's going to be exactly straight on this, and so I will choose to pin it onto here. So I want to center it on that backing fabric. So I have 3 or 4 inches on that side. Not quite as much on that side, so I'm going to tug it this direction a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start pinning from the middle, and I always pin through the leader first. Now I'm using these big corsage pins, or yeah, if you can see that, they have the big white pearl head on the top of it. These are probably 2 inches, about 2 inches long. I just have them in a pin cushion, and I set that right there on the long arm. I always go through the backing, I go through the leader first, and then pin it through onto the quilt top. So let me show you what that looks like. So I've pinned it through the leader, through the quilt top, sorry, and I'm just right there along the edge. And I'm going to do that all the way down. I start in the middle and work to one side, and then I will work to the other direction. And I'm just lining that quilt top right along the edge, so that I'm just getting the very top edge, probably the very top 1/4 inch of that quilt top. All right, and let's go the other direction. So the pins are just end to end. I have all of mine facing the same direction. Try to cut down on poking myself as much as I can. That helps when you're pulling them out too. You can all just go in the same direction and hopefully not get poked too many times. So just taking a big chunk of material into there, but keeping it smooth. I don't want it to pucker at all, but just putting those pins end to end. And the last one. All right, it's all pinned on there. All right, I'm going to pull that leader so that it's taut along there. Make sure the leader is all straight. Lock my thing over here. So just like I did with the backing fabric, as I roll this up, I just want to make sure I don't have any wrinkles. I want to try to keep my edges as straight as I can. So you'll see me move from one side over to the other, just to make sure my edges are all straight. right, and the quilt top is all loaded on there. So next comes the batting, and the batting is the piece that goes in between the top. This client has provided her own batting material. This is warm and white, a nice brand. Personally, I carry Quilter's Dream batting in the studio, so you do not have to provide your own batting. You're welcome to purchase Quilter's Dream from me. Quilter's Dream is a high-end quilting batting that is only available from quilt stores or Longarm Quilters, not available in your box stores. It's a very nice brand. Warm and White is also a good one, and the client has provided a 120 by 124, so a king-size batting. So I have plenty to work with. So first of all, what I'm going to do is lay this out here while it's still folded, because I will not need all that's provided here. I'm going to lay it out as large as the backing fabric, and then I'm going to go ahead and trim this extra because I don't need that part out over the edge. Okay, and that part will just be folded up and returned back to the quilter, and there's enough there to use that on a tablecloth on a table runner, or something similar to that. So I'm just laying this out so I can see about how much I need, and then I'm going to fold this back. My long arm has the feature where I can lift up this bar, and so I'm going to lift that up. I can lift up both sides, but I don't need to. I'm just going to tuck this batting underneath here. And smooth that all out. And lower the bar back down. All right, and that is how you load a quilt onto the long arm. I think I'll take a break here, and then we will record on how to get started on the stitching part.